the final talk is going to be from Holden Karau, who is I was going to say distinguished engineer, which I'm just using it as an adjective. I don't know if her title is distinguished, but I think that Holden's a remarkable engineer over at Netflix. She's been working on open source for a long time. She's written several books or co-written books on Spark. So that's sort of her main wheelhouse. But of course, she has things to say. And she has worked on Iceberg. So we wanted to invite her to talk about her open source work and her journey in building in the open, and then also to give a hands-on training later on today. If you haven't signed up for it, then there are still spots. It's this afternoon, so you can still sign up. But with that, Holden, come on up.
Fantastic. And I've got my emotional support coffee right here to keep everything going along. Cool. So yeah, this is the bumps along the way. So there will be happy and sad. I'm Holden. My pronouns are she or her. Currently, I'm at Netflix. I want to be really super clear. I'm not talking on behalf of them today. I very, very rarely am. If I ever am, I'll let you know. And I'll also have to let their PR department know and legal. I've been at a bunch of other companies, and I'm going to talk about some of my experiences there. If you think open source is cool, you might. You can watch some of my live streams. I live stream working on open source projects. If you've ever said to yourself, wow, that paint drying was super exciting, I encourage you to come and check out my Twitch live streams. They're pretty great. In addition to who I am professionally, I'm trans, queer, Canadian, on a green card, finally, thank God, and part of the broader leather community. These are not super relevant for open source, although I like to mention this because I think it's really useful for those of us who are building data tools to sort of look around the room. And if we realize like everyone went to University of Waterloo, that's not good, right? Or, if everyone went to UC Berkeley class of 2020, it's probably time to make sure we get someone from at least the class of 2018 in there. Slight joke. Okay. So what can you expect from this talk? This is not going to be super linear. ADHD is all kinds of fun. Hopefully you'll get kind of like a vibe of like what the trade-offs are of working in open source. Maybe some laughs. So far, I'm not getting a lot of that despite like my Lucky Charms and Jolt Cola. No. Has anyone here ever had Jolty Charms? That's okay. So what you do is you take Lucky Charms and you add Jolt Cola to it, and then you book an appointment with your dentist, and it's great. It's great. I don't recommend it. Okay, we got at least one laugh. Fantastic. There's going to be dog pictures and a bunch of awkward stories. It's going to be great. So I'm not going to talk about like individual people's names or project names too much. Or one true way to do open source, right? Like this is very much like my journey and my experiences. I unfortunately don't have a magic way of convincing your boss that you should be spending a lot of time contributing to open source projects. If I did, I probably wouldn't change jobs as often as I do, but that's a story for after beer. And so, yeah, we're going to go in a time machine. It's a shitty time machine. It runs on a 386. And this is sort of like how I got started with computers. I had a learning disability, still do, didn't get better. I can't write by hand really. If you ever ask me to like write by hand, you can kind of see some like vague squiggles that sometimes I can read, but often not. And I was super, super lucky, that I went to school in a country, with, let's say, different priorities, than here. And so there were computers, and it was great. And there was like special ed, and the special ed was actually like very, very helpful. And so big shout out to anyone who's ever done special ed teaching or has family who does teaching. That stuff is amazing. Without that, I don't think if I hadn't been given a 386 as a small child, I would certainly not be here today. I think I would be a very sad person. Best case scenario, I don't know. Maybe Tim Hortons. No, okay, yeah, whatever. Okay, cool. So fantastic. Couldn't write. Computers were like, oh, cool. I can finally express myself. I can write things. People can read them. They don't think I'm just stupid anymore. They just think I'm weird, which, fair point, I am. And so computers are cool, but I learn by taking things apart. Normally in the process, I break those things. Here's a picture of my Vespa broken. And the computer was fun, but I couldn't really take it apart very much. I didn't want to take it apart physically because I knew from experience that doing that would break them. And I couldn't really take apart any of the software because it was all closed source, and I was kind of sad. But my neighbor, thankfully, was a nerd and introduced me to Linux. And I could take it apart. I had no idea what the hell it was doing, but I could look at it, and that was so cool and so much fun. And so I don't know if I was the only kid in Ottawa whose like dream was like kernel developers are really cool, but this was like, yeah, kernel developers are the coolest people in the world. I wish I could be like that. And big shout out to Carleton University for teaching me as a small child. They taught me Perl, and that was a mistake. But to this day, I can still write really terrible regular expressions, and that's a super useful skill. And it's also terrible. But yeah, it was great. So Linux was like awesome. And I was like, this is really cool. I want to be a Linux developer. I could barely write Perl code. I definitely couldn't write any C code. So that was like challenging. And so I wanted to contribute to open source, but I didn't really know how. And then I went to university. I had bad facial hair. Still looked up to kernel developers and had like vague hippie-like ideals around software, you know, very much like, yeah, free kernels, this is good in some way that I don't super remember. And I still had very limited skills, right? Like I really wanted to do this, but it was kind of like the underpants gnome strategy. Step 1, computer. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, patch in Linux kernel. And the question mark kept eluding me. But I got super lucky. My university had a co-op program, and that's where you work for small amounts of money that are above the legal minimum wage, not always. And I got a first job doing QA, and I tried to write some open source Perl code there. No one wanted it. It was very sad. That's when I learned that code can have negative value. Specifically, if it has a lot of regular expressions, people do not want to see it. My second job was as a intern kernel developer. Big shout out to that Linux distro for taking a chance on an intern to write wireless device drivers for Linux. On a related note, if anyone remembers wireless device drivers for Linux, they were written by interns. Yeah, that makes sense, right? They've gotten a lot better. But this was fantastic. I learned some C. They taught me how to write code. I got to deal with like mailing lists. I got to submit patches. It was really cool, and I was so stoked. Big shout out to Andrew, I want to say Morton, for running the -mm branch. So much work into reviewing, and I think that's when I started to realize that like reviews were really important. Writing code was like, it was a good skill to have, but reviews were like really the bottleneck. Then after some number of jobs, I did a Google Summer of Code, and I contributed to some version. And that's actually how I got the Holden@apache.org email address, not from my work on Spark. That came much later. So I graduated. I went into the real world. The real world kind of sucks. It also has Perl running in production. I spent an entire Q4 on call. This was the Motorola pager. Actually, I guess this isn't Motorola. Whatever. This was the pager that I carried with me for 3 months. After that, I was like, I don't know if I want to do computers anymore. Computers apparently involve carrying a pager around and being sad. But then I happened across some people who were looking for Scala developers, but there were like not many Scala developers, and they were willing to settle for someone who knew Java and PLT scheme, because the number of people that knew that was not a lot either, but there were more of us. And they're like, yeah, that's close enough. We want someone who knows C, but you know A and B, so we can probably teach you C. And I will say, I wrote some atrociously bad Scala code that looked like someone who knew Scheme trying to write Java. It did not go well, but it was fantastic because we got to do open source. It was great. So it was a tiny company based in the Bay Area, lots of ups and downs with that startup. I have some hilarious stories of what can pass for human resources in a 50-person company. But it was fantastic. I got to do open source. I got to get back to what I loved. I didn't get to do kernel dev, but it was pretty great. We released a project called Slash'em. No reference. You all had maybe social lives in college and didn't play text-based role-playing games with your computer? Okay. Well, maybe not. Whatever. We named our software Slash'em. It was lots of fun, really great. But I also had this thing where I like money and health insurance. Coming from Canada, I remember going to the doctor for the first time and being asked for a visa and being very confused why they wanted to see my immigration status. And that was not what they were interested in. It turns out they wanted money. So strange. So I went to big companies because I was like, oh, I should work at big companies so I don't die. And this was great. They wanted to hire open source developers. A lot of them wanted to hire open source developers and then make it really hard to write open source code. They were like, yeah, we love the open source work that you've done, but before you send a PR, we need you to run it by legal, your manager, your manager's manager, and another IC. They should get back to you sometime next month. Okay? Yeah. So that was frustrating, but it was good because I had health insurance and I had time, because it turns out big companies don't work you as hard as startups. Some different trade-offs, and health insurance. So I didn't die. Also fantastic. And I was like, well, I've got some time. I'm going to write some books about open source, because it turns out the process for writing a book is a lot easier than the process for releasing source code at many companies. You just had to get your manager to sign off on it, and that was great. So I wrote a book. If you ever said to yourself, I wish I could write some open source, but I don't want to talk to lawyers, write a book. The pay is terrible. But it's okay, because the open source pay is also terrible in the way that the direct thing that you do doesn't actually pay you all that much, but in the indirect way where people want to hire you more afterwards to do other things because what you've done, they think makes you qualified to do what they're interested in. Super great, super fun. And now we're going to go on another tangent. I said this wasn't super linear. So, side note, right? Like, we're all sort of vaguely aware of career progression, right? How many people have looked at levels.fyi ever? Okay, way less career motivated than I thought. That's all right. Congratulations on escaping the American dream / rat race. I don't know, whatever. But so just like jobs, there's sort of like a progression that you can go through for open source development. All kinds of fun. And this is like the theory is you go from user to contributor to committer to PMC. Different people call these things different ideas, but like you get this general idea. You start off using some software, and then maybe you contribute to it. Maybe you write some bug reports. People start trusting you, so they let you make changes on your own. And then people start trusting you like a lot, so they let you like be involved in making the decisions. You probably have to make your own cake, or at least buy your own cake, right? No one's gonna buy you a cake for the congratulations on your 100 commits. You have to go out and do that yourself, which I did, and it's fine. ASF projects frequently use consensus-based voting for moving people on this sort of continuum from contributor to committer. Consensus-based voting has its ups and downs, and yeah, it can take a really, really long time to become a committer if you don't do the right things. And no one's written down what the right things are. And they'll also not tell you what the right things are. You'll find out afterwards. Also, they might not know what the right things are either. It's just kind of like a vibes-based approach, right? They're like, yeah, the vibes are good. Or like, nah, the vibes are not good. And if this sounds like a system that is perhaps not perfect, I would say you would be correct. Yeah. And sometimes you can like use your like progression in open source to help you progress on that levels.fyi board. If you like money, you can use it to extract more money from your employers. Of course, this is the general idea when the open source is separate from like a single vendor. When it's like a single vendor who controls things, then the progression is largely like, does this vendor like me? And the answer can be yes or no, and that matters a lot more. Okay, huzzah! Now, let's say you've joined a project, you've contributed to it for a while, and you're like, you know what I was missing in my life was meetings and emails. So you decide to go ahead and join a foundation to get more email. Congratulations. It's nice. You can help people go through the same processes you did before, and hopefully you can help new people avoid the same mistakes that your project did, like going with a vibes-based approach of picking who becomes committers. So far, I have not convinced anyone to avoid that, but one day I will. And then the final stage, burnout. Yeah. Okay, one person is laughing and one person is looking very sad. The other thing is, most of us write open source software because it's what we do for fun, right? And then we're like, you know what? I should try and turn what I do for fun into my job, because this is America, and if we don't turn something into money, what are we doing with our free time? It turns out that erasing the boundaries between your work and your personal life can have negative psychological impact. I am not a doctor, despite my very fashionable lab coat that I have at home, but this is a very real possibility, and if you do a lot of open source, please be aware that there's a really good chance that you might burn out, and keep measuring yourself. Feel free to take breaks from open source in the same way that you would take breaks from your actual job. And yeah, let's say you want to do open source. What do you have to get good at? Code reviews, email, and email. Mostly email. Essentially, if you've ever said to yourself, wow, I really wish all of the conversations I had with my coworkers were done with an 8-hour time difference over email, then open source might be right for you. Fantastic. Okay. And I know that we're running a little bit over, but I do have a few slides that I just want to share really quickly if I can get a yeah or like, okay, cool. So this is me trying to convince you to do code reviews. So open source code reviews are like mermaid school. They help you grow your skills. They build on your existing knowledge, right? So you can go from swimming or to swimming like a mermaid. You can go from writing Python to reviewing Python. They help you get better, and it involves a lot of people. The other one is sometimes I can trick my boss into paying for them. Not always. I did trick one of my bosses into paying for 66% of mermaid school, which is honestly better than the amount of open source I've managed to get my employers to pay for. It's probably like, 30%. So, it's like mermaid school. Why does that matter? So it's actually really cool. You can grow your skills, right? And you can see the world for values of the world, which are places with tech conferences. So if you've ever said to yourself, wow, I really want to go to Denver, or I really wish I could go to the Airport Marriott in insert city here, open source code reviews could be a great way to do that. The other one, though, is really there's a lot of people writing code, and that's great. I love that. Please keep writing code. But there's not a lot of people that wake up in the morning and say what I want to do is review code from a stranger. And so by doing the thing that people don't want to do, people will hopefully recognize you faster than if you do the thing that everyone wants to do. On the downside, they might want you to keep doing the thing that you don't want doing, but that's a problem for future you. And ideally, that'll come after my talk is done, so whatever. That's fine. Okay. Yeah. Right. And you also get to see more of a code base, right? When we're writing code, we normally see the thing that we're changing. But when you're reviewing code, I like to think that it doesn't take as long to review the code as it does to write it. So you're able to sort of pick up a project faster. So I think if you want to get involved with a project, a great way to do it is by reviewing some of the PRs that are occurring in this project. Huzzah, faster recognition. There's less people doing it, so you can stand out. And you can also control your time better. One of the things that is really challenging with open source is people have this expectation that you will respond to them and update your code. And that's work and it takes time. But the cool thing about code reviews is people don't normally have super strong expectations around code reviews. So if you come and leave some comments and you're like, cool, this looks good, but I got to bounce, no one's going to be pissed off. Whereas if you show up with a 2,000 line patch and just drop it on the mailing list and walk away, people are going to be kind of wow, what a dick. This isn't recorded, right? I should have asked earlier. Whatever. Anyways, cool. We're good. Yeah. And so people need you because people are burning out, right? Reviewers are burning out. Maintainers are burning out. Admittedly, that's like not a very convincing argument to do it because you might burn out, but you can be smarter than me and not burn out. It's great. Huzzah. Okay, so that's my like kind of short story in open source. I originally had a joke that like hopefully this is still being written, but I wrote a motorcycle here. But I ride a British bike, and just like all British bikes, it broke. So it's in the shop with a broken clutch and leaking oil. So yeah, it's a good reminder that all engineering sucks, including mine, right? To be clear, we all suck. So in conclusion, open source can be fun. You should get involved in it. I think a great way to do that is by reviewing code. Incidentally, that is also the way that makes my life easier, so you might want to second guess my suggestions. The final thing is my dog is cute as fuck. He is adorable. Actually, I guess the final thing is if you're taking the training this afternoon, I understand that the Wi-Fi is... let's go with great. It's fantastic. And in fact, it is so fantastic that you might want to start pulling a Docker container right now. So if you could run a Docker pull Holden K/HPS:05, 0.5, that would be fantastic. And I would really, really appreciate that, because then maybe we'll have containers instead of getting to sit and talk about the many benefits of Iceberg. We can play around with it. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I guess we could do questions. I don't know. It looks like you had a question. Okay, fantastic.
Thanks for presenting, Holden. Obviously, we develop that the ones who versus that edition. So I understand that way, but like, how do I get onto the spot? I know I came in late, might not be a responsible.
No.
On like, where do I put in the open source validators of work along with validator work?
Yeah. Okay, so you want to get started contributing to open source. So I think that code reviews are a good way to do it. Obviously, I'm biased. I think that's cool. I think there's a bunch of different projects. I would encourage you to start with a smaller project and try and find something that you're actively using at work. And that'll take some time, but you can kind of like build the muscle memory, and you can also like get your boss or managers used to the idea that you do this thing on this thing that you use at work and that is worthwhile. I find one of the arguments that has somewhat helped has been the like, remember when this thing changed and it broke everything for us? I want to be involved in making sure that doesn't happen again. And sometimes people are like, oh yeah, that sounds fine. Don't spend too much time doing it, but like, let's keep our shit working. Cool.
Wait, last question I had, the Wi-Fi strong enough to stream Netflix?
I would say it is probably not strong enough to stream Netflix. Please don't stream Netflix right now. That is, yes.
So, dog, you want to do what?
Cool. Okay. Thank you.